I don't have a mama. Can I spend a day with you, ma'am? The tiny voice, fragile as a snowflake, cut through the gentle hum of Christmas carols. It begged the question to the female CEO, a millionaire whose world was built of steel and glass, not warmth and hugs. The words repeated, more determined. This time, I don't have a mama. Can I spend a day with you, ma'am? The voice pierced the laughter, echoing across the snow-covered park. Kathy Bennett blinked, startled out of her thoughts, and looked down. A little girl, no older than 3, stood before her. She was bundled in a red puffy coat that had clearly seen better days. In one mitten-clad hand, she clutched a worn teddy bear. Her wide brown eyes glistened with a universe of hope. Snowflakes landed softly on her, lashes unmoving like the breath she was holding. Kathy's brows furrowed in confusion. She looked around instinctively, unsure what to make of the strange request. Her gaze landed on a man standing a few yards away. He stood motionless, just watching. His coat was threadbare, his boots dusted with snow, but his posture wasn't desperate. It was protective, calm, and waiting. Their eyes met. His were warm, the kind that carried a quiet strength. There was weariness in them, yes, but also an undeniable tenderness. As he watched the little girl at Kathy's feet, Kathy slowly turned back to the child, her own voice, usually cool and polished from years in executive meetings, softened in a way that surprised even her. What's your name, sweetheart? Lena, the girl whispered. I just want to know what it feels like to hold a mama's hand just for today. The words struck something deep inside Kathy, a place so long forgotten it hurt. She swallowed hard, her breath fogging in the frigid air. She looked down at her own gloved hand, then slowly, hesitantly, extended it. Because it's Christmas, she heard herself say. Maybe we both deserve a little joy. Today, Lena's face lit up like the dawn. Her tiny hand slipped into Kathy's, as if it had always belonged there. The man approached, close enough. Now that Kathy could see the lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes, the snow caught in the uneven stubble on his jaw. He crouched beside the girl and gently brushed the snow from her hood. She's not usually this bold, he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. He glanced up at Kathy. But I think today she just needed to ask. Kathy nodded, a strange tightness forming in her throat. She's brave. So is her father, he replied simply, a statement of fact, not a plea. There was no bitterness in his tone, only truth. No explanation followed, no apology for their sudden presence in her world. There was just a quiet gratitude that she had not turned away. The park around them buzzed with life. Children in puffy jackets darted past. Parents laughed as they pulled sleds across icy paths. A brass band played Silent Night near the entrance, where twinkling lights wrapped around towering pine trees. Everywhere she looked, the world seemed wrapped in warmth. Everywhere except for Kathy. Until now. She was dressed impeccably, as always. A luxurious cream coat was draped over her shoulders, her heels, swapped only recently for practical snow boots. Her golden hair, flawless as ever, framed a face that had graced magazine covers and Forbes profiles. But beneath it all, she felt like glass, crisp, clear, and always a second away from shattering. In her expensive handbag, buried beneath a silk scarf and her leather planner, sat a Christmas card from her executive board. It said, "Thank you for leading us through another record-breaking year." That was all. No handwriting, no personal note, just another sterile symbol of her success. And here in the middle of a small-town park, a little girl had just offered her more human connection than she had felt in a decade. "Would you two like to walk with me for a bit?" Kathy asked, carefully. Lena beamed, nodding so fast her hood bounced. The man, who introduced himself as Charles, paused, searching her eyes for a moment. Then, with the smallest of smiles, he said she'd like that very much, and so they walked. A trio that made no sense to the outside world. A millionaire CEO, a man who smelled faintly of sawdust and cold wind, and a little girl with holes in her mittens and more heart than the sky had stars. But to them in that moment, it felt like something that just might Heal them all. The snow crunched softly beneath Kathy's boots as she walked slowly through the park, Lena's tiny hand still wrapped in hers. The little girl swung their joined arms with glee, her red coat a bright dot of joy against the white canvas of winter. Charles followed a few steps, behind a respectful distance. He was not too close to intrude, but never too far to stop watching. His eyes stayed on Lena with the steady warmth of a lighthouse in the dark. Kathy glanced back at him occasionally. Each time Charles simply nodded, calm and reassuring, as if silently reminding her, she's okay. She's in good hands. They stopped at a wooden cart selling ice cream, the vendor laughing about how cold weather never stopped children from wanting sweets. Kathy bent down. What flavor would you like, sweetheart? Vanilla, Lena said, her voice still shy. With sprinkles, please. Vanilla. With sprinkles it is, Kathy smiled, handing over a crisp bill. She turned back to Lena. So tell me something about you. Lena's cheeks puffed out as she licked her cone. Papa makes toys out of wood. He made me a rocking horse and a dragon. A dragon? Kathy laughed, genuinely surprised. Yep. It doesn't breathe fire, but it guards my bed, Lena giggled. And Papa tells me stories every night. But he's not very good at the princess stuff. He doesn't know how to do princess hair. Kathy's laughter rose like a bell. Well, maybe I could try someday. I've read a lot of fairy tales. Really? Lena's eyes lit up. Like Cinderella? Cinderella, Rapunzel. Even the little match girl, Kathy nodded. I love the match girl, Lena whispered, her tone suddenly more solemn. But she was so cold. Kathy paused, her heart aching for the child's empathy. She looked down at the girl and gently brushed a few snowflakes from her coat hood. Then let's make sure today is warm, okay? Lena nodded, her bright smile returning. They walked past market stalls filled with the scent of gingerbread and handmade scarves. Kathy bought her a small snow globe, a tiny town that swirled with glitter when shaken. Lena held it to her chest like it was a treasure. Charles watched from the edge of the path, his arms folded loosely, his breath forming soft clouds in the winter air. When Lena turned back to look for him, he smiled and gave her a quiet wave. She beamed in return before skipping back to Kathy. And just like that, the invisible thread connecting all three of them grew a little tighter. They even took a selfie together in front of a large snowman. Kathy crouched to Lena's level, their cheeks pressed together, and for a brief second she forgot the boardrooms, the charts, the years of silence echoing through her penthouse high above the city. Then came the moment that would change everything. In the heart of the park stood a giant Christmas tree, glowing with thousands of golden lights, each bulb dancing like a tiny star. Kathy knelt beside Lena, helping her reach for a low-hanging ornament shaped like a bell. Lena hesitated, then leaned in close and whispered, "You're warm, just like I always imagined a mama would be." The world went quiet. Kathy froze, not from the cold, but from the profound weight of that single, soft truth. Something deep inside her cracked open, a place she had sealed long ago with resignation and grief. She had once dreamed of having a child of her own. She had imagined lullabies, messy kitchens, and sleepy hugs at bedtime. But life, with its cruel and unpredictable twists, had told her she was not meant for that life. And yet here was this little girl, not hers, not planned, saying the very words she had longed to hear. It was from no one in particular, and now from the one heart that suddenly seemed to matter most. Kathy wrapped her arms around Lena and held her close, burying her face in the girl's soft hair. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for letting me be your mama for today." Behind them, Charles approached slowly, sensing the sanctity of the moment, careful not to disturb it. He sat on the bench beside them, snow gently collecting on his sleeves. Kathy turned to him, her voice low and full of a feeling she couldn't name. "You've raised a little angel." Charles gave a small, weary smile, his eyes on Lena. "She raised me first." They sat in a comfortable silence for a while, sipping hot cocoa from a nearby vendor. The cup warmed Kathy's hands, but It was the presence of the little girl on her lap and the quiet man beside her that warmed something far deeper. For the first time in years, Kathy felt not powerful, not accomplished, but present and real. The bus hissed softly as it pulled into the snowy lane. Kathy stood beside the small bench near the stop, her hands deep in her coat pockets, watching Lena hold Charles's hand tightly. "I had so much fun today," Lena beamed, looking up at her. "You're the nicest mama I ever had, even if it was just for now." Kathy smiled, her heart aching with a strange and beautiful warmth. She crouched to Lena's level and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you for letting me be." As Charles prepared to step onto the bus with Lena, Kathy hesitated. Her voice was quieter than usual, uncertain, almost shy. Would it be okay if I saw her again? Charles paused on the step, glancing down at Lena, who was already tugging at his sleeve with wide, pleading eyes. His face softened into a genuine smile. If it makes her smile like this, I don't think I could ever say no. 3 days later, they found themselves standing in front of a tall modern townhouse at the edge of the city. It was a world of glass frames and sleek lines, a universe away from the worn-down apartment Charles and Lena called home. He adjusted his flannel collar, awkwardly shifting his weight as Kathy opened the door. "Come in," she said gently. "You're not guests. You're invited." The inside was pristine, but surprisingly not cold. Soft lighting, warm wooden floors, and the scent of cinnamon and something baking in the oven. Lena clapped her hands in delight. "It smells like cookies," Kathy laughed and led her to the kitchen. "That's because we're going to make some." Charles stood at the threshold, feeling out of place. Everything was too clean, too quiet, too different from his own life. But then he saw Lena, her tiny hands buried in a mixing bowl, a dusting of flour on her nose, and his shoulders finally relaxed. Kathy offered him coffee, not some fancy espresso or imported blend, just regular coffee in a plain mug. "I hope this is okay." He took it, the warmth seeping into his hands. Perfect. Each visit became more natural, more comfortable. Kathy never tried to impress them with her wealth, only to connect with them as people. She let Lena decorate cookies messily, draw on her expensive office whiteboard, and even climb into her lap during Zoom meetings, with bewildered board members on the other end. And Charles, though still reserved, began to open up. He talked about carpentry, about books he loved, about the man he used to be before his world became solely about diapers and bills. One evening, after Lena had fallen asleep on the couch clutching a new teddy bear Kathy had found in her attic, Charles stepped onto the balcony. The city lights blinked in the distance like faraway stars. Kathy joined him, handing him a soft blanket. "She's a beautiful child," she said softly. "She's everything," Charles replied, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. They stood in a comfortable silence for a while. Then Kathy turned, her voice barely a whisper. "She's not your daughter, is she?" Charles didn't answer immediately. He looked down, his fingers tightening around the warm cup in his hands. "No," he finally said. "Not by blood." Kathy watched him, carefully waiting. He looked back at her, his voice steady but thick with meaning. "But by every single heartbeat." That sentence hung in the air between them, sacred and fragile. Kathy didn't speak. She didn't need to. She only reached out and gently touched his hand, the first time she had initiated contact. There were no words, just the quiet acknowledgement of a profound truth both of them had started to feel. They were not just visitors in each other's lives anymore. Something was changing. Something real was beginning. Snow had fallen thick that night. Charles began, his voice low. They were in her kitchen, Lena fast and asleep upstairs. It was the kind that muffled every sound, blanketing the world in an eerie stillness. I had just come home from a late shift, fixing a neighbor's broken porch when I saw it, a small wicker basket just sitting there quietly on my doorstep. He paused, the memory still vivid. I froze. Inside was a baby, so tiny, wrapped in a frayed pink blanket with a little bear stitched onto the corner. There was no name tag, no letter, no sign of who had left her. There was only a single sheet of lined paper, the ink smudged by the falling snowflakes. It said, "Please don't hate her." He stared into his cup. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring into this infant's eyes. They were wide, open, blue like winter frost, and they didn't blink. I didn't know how to hold a baby. I'd never changed a diaper, never warmed a bottle. But something about that gaze, it was so calm and haunting. Walking away felt impossible, so I took her in. That night and the many nights after were a blur of crying, pacing, and Googling how to sterilize bottles at 3 a.m. I was sleeping in chairs, completely exhausted. I sold most of the little I owned. I left my full-time job at the hardware store and started picking up odd jobs, fixing gutters, patching walls, anything to pay the rent and buy formula. But she never, ever lacked for love. Every night I read her fairy tales until she drifted off, her tiny hand holding my finger like it was the only anchor she had in the world. When she cried, I hummed old songs I barely remembered the words to. And when she took her first steps, I think I cried harder than she did when she fell. I named her Lena, not because it had some special meaning, just because it sounded like hope. Sitting across from him, Kathy listened in complete silence. The quiet warmth from the stove made the room feel smaller, more intimate. Charles had shared this memory without any need for embellishment, just the plain, hard truth. I was scared out of my mind, he admitted, but I couldn't leave her there. I just couldn't. Why didn't you call child services? Kathy whispered. Charles smiled faintly, though the smile didn't reach his eyes, because I knew I wasn't her best option. But I was the only one who didn't walk away. The room went still. Kathy stared at him, her mouth slightly parted, but no words came. Her fingers curled around the edge of her cup. Then, almost involuntarily, the words tumbled out. When I was 27, I thought I was going to be a mother. Charles looked up, his full attention on her now. She continued, her voice low and steady. I was in love, or at least I thought I was. He said he wanted a future, said all the right things. She paused. Taking a deep breath, we heard the heartbeat at 12 weeks. I cried. I had never felt a joy like that in my entire life. But at week 16, I had a complication. The emergency room, cold hands, fluorescent lights. And later, a doctor with soft, pitying eyes told me it might be difficult, almost impossible, he said, to carry a child to term again. Charles said nothing. He just listened, giving her the space she needed. Kathy kept her gaze fixed on the dark surface of her tea. He left. He said it was too much. He said I should focus on healing. She let out a short, humorless laugh. What he really meant was that he didn't want the weight of loving someone who couldn't give him the family he wanted. There was silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was deep, like two people finally showing their scars to one another. I never really cried, Kathy said, finally looking up at him. Because Kathy Bennett doesn't cry. Not in boardrooms, not in hospitals, not even alone in the dark. Charles studied her, seeing past the composed, elegant facade for the first time. Her eyes, her beautiful eyes, were breaking open. She added quietly, it's not that I'm alone. It's that no one ever stays long enough to see the parts of me I try so hard to hide. And there in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by the falling snow and the soft ticking of a distant clock, something shifted between them forever. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't say anything grand or poetic. He just looked at her with eyes that didn't pity, didn't question, but simply understood. And for the first time in a long, long time, Kathy didn't feel like she had to be strong. She just had to be. The days blurred gently into each other, and something in Kathy's pristine townhouse began to shift. It wasn't in grand gestures or spoken promises, but in the smallest of routines. Kathy had started teaching Lena how to write. They used a big chalkboard in the sunroom where light poured in. Every afternoon, and Lena's giggles echoed off the glass walls. The little girl would hold the chalk with fierce concentration, her tongue poking out slightly as she scrawled big, clumsy letters. A, A, she read aloud one day, her voice soft with wonder. Lena grinned, a triumphant, toothy smile. Mama, that's you. Kathy blinked, taken, completely off guard. Then she smiled, a genuine smile that trembled ever so slightly. Yes, I guess it is. Down the hall, Charles had heard the exchange. He didn't interrupt. He simply leaned against the door frame, his arms crossed, a quiet storm of emotions passing through his gaze. Later that evening, while washing dishes, Charles watched as Lena climbed onto Kathy's lap and asked for a bedtime story. It was a routine that, until recently, had belonged solely to him. He dried his hands slowly on a towel, his heart feeling heavier than he wanted to admit. Kathy was always so careful. She never overstepped. She would always glance toward Charles, seeking his unspoken permission before holding Lena's hand for too long or kissing her goodnight on the forehead. But feelings don't ask for permission. She had fallen into a rhythm with Lena, and without meaning to, she had fallen into a rhythm with Charles too. He was nothing like the men from her world. He wore no expensive cufflinks, carried no air of corporate arrogance. He was just a man who could build a swing set from scratch, who remembered exactly how Lena liked her oatmeal, who could fix a leaky faucet without making it a grand performance. And he was kind. Quietly, fiercely kind. Still, Kathy could feel the weight of something unspoken growing heavier between them every day. The breaking point came on a cool Saturday afternoon. Kathy had taken Lena to the park, while Charles stayed behind to finish repairing a shelf in the garage. They had laughed through a puppet show, shared a cone of ice cream, and picked daisies on a hillside near the duck pond. They were lying on the grass, watching the clouds drift by, when Lena suddenly turned her head and asked, "Mama Kathy?" Kathy turned, brushing a lock of blonde hair from the child's forehead. "Yes, sweetheart?" Lena's eyes were wide and devastatingly honest. "If I already have a Mama Kathy, then do I still need my daddy?" Stopped. Kathy froze, every muscle in her body locking into place. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart thudded painfully loud in her chest. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Finally, she managed to speak, her voice strained. "You will always need your daddy, Lena. He's your home." Lena nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer, and returned to plucking petals from a daisy. But Kathy could not shake the question. That night she didn't come in for dinner. She left a brief message saying something had come up at work and she needed some space. Charles read it twice, then sat at the kitchen table long after Lena had fallen asleep, staring at the empty chair across from him. Meanwhile, Kathy sat alone in her car, parked just a block away from her own apartment. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. Her eyes were fixed on nothing. She had thought the hardest part of letting someone in would be her own fear, but it wasn't. It was guilt. What if the love she was beginning to feel for Lena was a thief in disguise? What if every smile, every bedtime story, every kiss was slowly stealing something precious from Charles, something she had no right to take? And what if her growing feelings for Charles himself were not as one-sided as she had tried to believe? That thought scared her more than any boardroom failure ever had. She whispered into the echoing silence of her car, "I didn't mean to take her from you." But the silence did not answer. It only asked one terrifying question. What will you do with this love, now that you know it's real? And for the first time in her life, the brilliant Kathy Bennett did not have an answer. Kathy had disappeared. It wasn't in a dramatic, storming out sort of way. She simply stopped calling, stopped texting. No more impromptu visits, no more shared dinners or chalkboard lessons. Just a deafening silence. Charles noticed it immediately, a hollow space where her warmth used to be. He didn't ask questions. He didn't speak of it to Lena, who asked every single day, "Is Mama, Kathy coming over today?" He would just smile gently, brush her hair back from her forehead and say, "Maybe tomorrow, sweetie." But the tomorrow stretched on, empty and quiet. So Charles poured himself into being everything Lena needed. He cooked her favorite soups, read her 3 stories at bedtime instead of 1, and carved her a new toy bunny from a soft piece of pine wood. He smiled wider. He laughed louder. But at night, when she was finally asleep, he would sit alone at the kitchen table, his hands folded tight, and wonder what he had done wrong. Then came the storm. It started with a cough, just a light tickle in Lena's chest. By bedtime, her forehead was burning with fever. Charles stayed up with her all night, holding her small, trembling body against his chest. He whispered lullabies into her hair even as a cold panic settled deep in his bones. By morning, her fever had worsened. Her lips were dry, her skin clammy and pale. Outside, the snow fell hard, thick, and blinding, burying the city in white. He bundled her up, wrapping her in every warm piece of clothing they owned, and carried her on foot through the icy wind to the nearest urgent care center. Inside, the waiting room was eerily empty. A nurse took one look at Lena and rushed them straight into an examination room. But after a dose of medication and hours of anxious waiting, her fever barely budged. Charles sat beside the small hospital bed, his own hands shaking. Lena whimpered in her sleep, her small face flushed and restless. His phone was in his hand before he even realized he'd reached for it. He hesitated for only a second, his pride warring with his fear. Then he pressed her name. It only rang once. 20 minutes later, Kathy pushed open the hospital room door, her coat still dusted with snow, her face pale with worry. She didn't speak. She simply walked straight to Lena's bedside and knelt down. Charles looked up at her, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled his knees. He hadn't seen her in weeks, and still she came. "Her fever, it won't go down," he said, his voice barely an audible whisper. "I know," Kathy replied softly. She took Lena's tiny hot hand into her own and pressed a cool cloth to the girl's forehead. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," she whispered. To the sleeping child, "Mama's here." Charles had to turn away for a moment, his chest too tight to breathe. For the next few hours they stayed there together, a silent, unified team. Kathy refused to leave Lena's side. She hummed lullabies. She whispered words of comfort. And when Lena finally calmed, drifting into a deeper, quieter sleep, her small body curled into Kathy's lap as if it had always belonged there. Charles stood a few steps away, just watching them. He had never seen Lena look so peaceful, not since the day she was left on his doorstep. He stepped closer, then slowly sat in the chair beside them. Lena's head rested trustingly against Kathy's shoulder. Kathy glanced up at him, and in that moment the exhaustion and fear in both their eyes met and understood. "I was afraid," Charles said quietly, his voice rough with unshed tears. "I was afraid she'd love you more than me." Kathy stared at him, her own breath catching in her throat. "But now," he continued, his gaze softening as he looked at the two of them, "I know. Maybe she just needs us both." Kathy reached for his hand. She didn't need words. Her fingers said everything as they curled tightly around his. A scene, anchor in the storm. That night, in the soft, sterile hum of the hospital's quiet corridors, something healed between them. Not everything, not yet, but enough. And for the first time in weeks, neither of them felt alone. 1 year later, a fresh blanket of snow covered the small hilltop cottage in soft, glistening white. The air was crisp, the trees whispered in the winter silence, and the chimney puffed a steady, welcoming trail of smoke into the sky. This place was nothing like Kathy's former life in the glass penthouse that towered above the city. That world had been one of cold, steel gleaming surfaces and polished solitude. That life had been defined by power, precision, and deadlines. But this home, this little cabin, built of pine and warmth, was built on quiet joys. Its wooden beams seemed to hold laughter in their very grain. Its walls echoed with bedtime stories, not boardroom commands. The windows were often fogged from a simmering pot of soup on the stove. The scent of cinnamon and sawdust lingered in every room, and the shelves overflowed with Lena's colorful drawings and Charles's handmade wooden toys. Inside, Kathy hummed softly as she stirred a bubbling pot of stew. Her golden hair, once always perfectly coiffed for the corporate world, was now tied in a messy bun. There was a smudge of flour on her cheek and a deep settled warmth in her eyes. Charles stood beside her at the kitchen counter, carefully carving the final details into a miniature wooden rocking horse. It was for a little boy at the local shelter, a project for the small non-profit they had founded. Together, their hands moved in a quiet, familiar rhythm, the kind shared by people who no longer needed words to understand one another. Their movements were simple, but their hearts beat with the same quiet certainty. Lena, now 4 years old and bursting with imagination, dashed into the kitchen with glitter in her curls and paint on her cheeks. She was waving a crayon drawing in the air like a treasure map. "Mama, Papa, look what I made," she squealed with delight. "It's our house with stars on the roof." "That means it's magic." Kathy knelt down, her breath catching from a burst of laughter, and pulled Lena into a tight hug. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. And you know what? I think you're right. It is magic." Charles leaned in, brushing a stray speck of glitter off Lena's nose with a chuckle. "Definitely our best Christmas yet." They had called their foundation One More Day, a name born from that first day of kindness that had rewritten the future for 3 lonely strangers. Now it served dozens of single parents and children in the community, giving them meals, toys, shelter, and most of all, hope. Because both Kathy and Charles knew just how far one small act of love could reach. Later that evening, after a simple dinner and stories by the crackling fireplace, Kathy stepped outside to feel the cool snow on her skin. The night was perfectly still. Snowflakes drifted down like silent blessings from a velvet sky. Behind her, the soft amber lights of the cottage cast a golden, welcoming hue across the snow-covered ground. She inhaled the cold, crisp air, scented with pine, and felt a profound peace settle deep in her bones. Charles came out a moment later, wrapping a warm wool scarf around her shoulders with a quiet gentleness that was so uniquely him. "Still adjusting to country life?" he asked, his voice low and amused. Kathy smiled, her eyes fixed on the starlit sky. "I've burned 5 loaves of bread. I accidentally ruined a birdhouse you made, and I somehow managed to get wood glue stuck in my eyelashes." She paused, turning to him. "But I have never, ever been happier." He smiled, a slow, warm smile that reached his eyes. Then he reached into the pocket of his coat. "I have something for you." She turned toward him, curious, and then she froze. He held out a small, simple wooden box. It was handcrafted, smooth to the touch, and bore the faint, sweet scent of cherry wood. Inside, resting on a bed of dark velvet, was a ring. It was carved from the very same wood. There was no diamond, no gold, just a perfect, unbroken circle of care, shaped by his hands and his heart. Kathy's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes lifted to meet his, steady, kind, and full of a quiet, hopeful love. In that moment, Charles knelt on one knee in the deep snow. The cold didn't matter. The entire world was warm. "You're not the miracle I asked for, Kathy," he said softly, his voice roughened by emotion. "You're the miracle I didn't even know I needed." His words were simple, but they were the truest words he had ever spoken. "Will you be my wife?" Tears blurring her vision, Kathy dropped to her knees too, the cold snow soaking through her jeans as she wrapped her arms around his neck. She was laughing and crying all at once. "Yes," she whispered, her voice shaking with a joy so immense it felt like it could light up the entire sky. "Yes, let's build this life. Not perfect, but ours." Inside the house, Lena had peeked through the frosted window, her eyes wide with wonder. When she saw them embracing in the snow, she squealed with pure delight. Mama said yes. The little house seemed to glow brighter than ever that night as if the love inside had finally spilled out, covering every crack and corner. And outside, in the holy stillness of Christmas Eve, under a sky full of stars and falling snow, love had carved its own quiet miracle. Gently, tenderly, forever. One more year passed, and the town still shimmered under December's glistening snow. But this time, Kathy Bennett was not in a boardroom. She had gracefully stepped down from her role as CEO, not in scandal or defeat, but in quiet peace. The city lights still glowed downtown, but her heart now beat to a different rhythm. The steady heartbeat of a home, the joyful laughter of a child, and the profound warmth of a love found in the most unlikely of places. She and Charles now ran one more day full-time. Their foundation had grown deep roots in the community, a testament to their shared belief that even one good day could change everything. Their home was the same modest log cabin tucked near the forest's edge. There were no golden handles or marble counters, just creaking wooden floors, hand-carved furniture, and the constant, comforting smell of cinnamon and pine. Each corner told a story. Each scratch on the floor whispered of a life being lived with purpose and meaning. Lena had started preschool. Each morning she would proudly march in with her handmade backpack and tell her teachers, "My mama reads me fairy tales every night, and my papa makes all the best toys for our school." At pickup time, she would run into Kathy's arms, shouting, "We made snowflake crowns today," before climbing into the old pickup truck that Charles had somehow kept running for all these years. There were no fancy vacations or private jets. Instead, there were picnics in the woods, marshmallows roasted over bonfires, and snow angels made while giggling until their cheeks hurt. There were quiet nights reading under shared blankets and noisy mornings with pancakes that never quite looked like perfect circles. And then came the anniversary, Christmas Eve. The three of them returned to the park where it all began. The town square was lit up again, just as bright as before. Families bustled about, music played, and children laughed. But this time, they were no longer on the outside looking in. Kathy wore her warm wool coat and a scarf Lena had designed with a generous amount of glitter glue. Charles held a thermos of hot cocoa, its steam curling into the frosty sky. And between them, holding both their hands, was Lena. She was taller now, still in a red coat, but with eyes that sparkled brighter than any of the Christmas lights. They walked slowly past the same bench where Kathy had once sat, so terribly alone. Lena tugged on both their hands, stopping them. "Can we spend every day together forever?" she asked. Charles looked at Kathy. Kathy looked at Charles. Their hands tightened around Lena's. "Forever and ever," they said in perfect unison. Lena stopped, threw her arms around their legs in a fierce hug, and looked up with that old, wise soul in her eyes. "I don't have a mama," she began, then a brilliant smile spread across her face. "But now I have Mama Kathy, and it's forever." Kathy knelt, tears of pure joy filling her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, forever." They embraced as a family, as the snow began to fall. Again, soft, silent, and gentle as a promise kept. In the quiet of the evening, with twinkling lights and music drifting in the distance, their family stood, whole and complete. Not by blood, not by plan, but by the beautiful, powerful choice to love. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, we invite you to keep the warmth alive. Every soul has a story, and every story has the power to heal, inspire, and bring a little light to someone's darkest hour. Subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories for more heartfelt tales that remind us of the incredible strength found in kindness, the magic hidden in ordinary moments, and the love that finds us when we least expect it. Hit that like button if Lena's Christmas wish made you tear up. And please share this story with someone who still believes in second chances, found families, and the undeniable magic of Christmas. Miracles. Because sometimes one simple question can change a lifetime. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.